So now we're going to talk
the
about
WoodChipper murder, which is which predated Josh being on Dateline. It predated America's love affair with true crime, and it predated your birth, Courtney, I think. Actually, that's not true. But
let's say it's true.
Anyway, it was a long time ago. And but this story, the WoodChipper murder, let me speak, Mankiewicz.
Wow. Yeah, right. Why am I here? Good point.
Why are you yelling?
Oh, my God. So, he's holding up the please stand by again.
I need one of those for the house.
Right? You just walk around with that.
This is a good story, everybody who thinks we're just hacking around. We have a very good story for you, and here's the story. You've just heard of one good story. Here's the second one. This is a bonus good story. This story has so many elements that you would think it a typical Dateline type story, but it predated Dateline is what I'm trying to say. And now we can tell the story of the WoodChipper murder. And I'll tell you why I particularly thought of it this week, Josh Mankiewicz, because there was a WoodChipper accident this week.
In Virginia. Virginia.
A Virginia man has died after being pulled head first into a woodchipper.
Wow.
The man whose name has not been released was trimming a tree and was part of a crew working at a home in Saltville, Virginia.
Yeah, that's awful.
It's an unfortunate incident. I hate that it happened, said the supervisor. It was ruled an accident. Now, in our story, and of course there are many WoodChipper accidents, it's probably one of the more dangerous pieces of equipment.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
Don't you think it's one of the more? I mean,
right?
There've got to be other accidents. I mean, first of all, there's warnings written all over it. Like if you rent a woodchipper or go somewhere where they're using one, and you can rent one. In fact,
it's part of the story.
The guy in the story we're talking about rented one. But like if you have brush to clear or something, you can rent. And there's warnings, big warnings written all over it. Like don't put your hand anywhere near here.
Don't wear a necktie when you're, But this guy got caught. A part of your jacket can get caught. You're done.
Oh yeah, no, it's a horrible thing. And here's what I wonder, and I don't know anything about this week's WoodChipper death that I read briefly in the newspaper, but what I'm wondering is whether that guy had ever worked around a woodchipper before. I'm wondering whether that was a guy hired off the street corner. For because the supervisor is the guy who says, this is a terrible thing. I don't know. Maybe he's a seasoned guy who worked on a woodchipper for years and just got too close or got careless. That's certainly possible. I'm wondering whether this was like holiday help. Somebody who was, hired, for the day or for the week or something and hadn't really worked around a woodchipper before and maybe didn't understand the risks involved. I don't know, but it's an awful thing.
Well, I think,
but this week's WoodChipper death.
Yeah, go ahead.
This week's WoodChipper death, and that's I believe that is not the one that killed the guy this week.
The one that killed the guy this week doesn't have the feeder thing up top. I think it has.
It's also. I also think it's much bigger.
Yeah. This is a smaller, but this is a good little rep. This is a woodchipper that Kim's put up there. But the reality is that this is kind of a. You can see a foot sticking out of the top. It's not a real foot, but this is kind of an art piece or something with the WoodChipper. You can see a foot at the top, but that's kind of a tip of the hat to Fargo,
right?
Because in Fargo, the body parts were, the guys there with the leg of the woman. Yeah,
right.
But
and
that's it. This is the WoodChipper in Fargo. Yeah,
it is because of the story that we're talking about, the 1986 disappearance and subsequent murder of Helle Crafts, which I think might be pronounced Hella. That made it into Fargo. It's this story influenced the writing of Fargo and the use of the WoodChipper.
That's right. Josh is so right about that. This is a real true story, as a real life story, and this aspect of Fargo was inspired by it. So, Josh, they actually we've talked about this before. We talked about it for years before you were on Dateline. In fact, Josh gave me this book, I think, once as a birthday present called The WoodChipper Murder.
Yes.
So it's all there.
Yep.
So, Josh, let's tell the story quickly because it is, as I say, it is a Dateline-esque story, even though it predated Dateline.
Well, it is. And like the case that we talk about in Mortal Sin, there was so much there at the beginning that should have alerted law enforcement that something was going on here other than what the participants were alleging. I mean, this was not a carefully planned, executed, and covered up crime. This was a poorly planned, executed, and covered up crime. And the killer very nearly got away with it, just like the killer in Mortal Sin very nearly got away with it. Hang on one second. Someone is calling me.
Oh, Lord, we've got to stop every time you get a call. Are you kidding? Can't you put your phone on silence?
I did put it on silent. I just want to make sure. I want to make sure it's not the office because
I can't believe
I have to be ready at a moment.
Producing this thing has no idea what they're doing.
you'd think the producer would tell you, hey, by the way, silence your phone.
My phone is silent, but I saw the phone ringing, even though I had silenced it. I thought that it might be someone important like Courtney.
Thank you.
Oh my God, Josh! I just don't see. I mean,
You just don't get it, do you?
you don't.
You don't.
You don't get it, Josh. You're on a podcast right now.
I have to be ready to go to a crime scene at any moment.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get back to our story.
This apparently isn't one of those moments. But so this was in 1986, and Richard Crafts was a pilot. Yeah, and his wife was a flight attendant, although for a different airline. And his story was that one day she just disappeared. She had gone to another country. He told a couple of different stories. You know, flight attendants can fly very easily. You know, back then.
She was, I believe, she was an international flight attendant, as I recall, but I might be wrong. Yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Yes. So the allegation was that she, you know, had gone to visit friends overseas or her mother, I think. You know, of course, you know, checking to see who left the country and who came in. You can do that today with a couple of clicks of a computer mouse. But back then, you had to actually, I think, run your finger down a long list of passport names, which, you know, in some cases might not be spelled correctly, or might be the ink might be smudged, or the printer might not have done its job. It was a, you know, in the same way that like phone calls weren't always recorded, particularly like within area codes and things like that. There just wasn't a digital footprint that there is now. So there was a very long period of time in which Mr. Crafts was not only not in custody, but not under real suspicion by law enforcement. This happened.
And there's the wife, the woman who said was missing, and Helle Crafts. Yeah, go ahead.
This happened in small town Connecticut, and I guess the idea, you know, Mr. Crafts also was, I think, an auxiliary policeman in the same town. So he had some sort of like access and friendship with law enforcement. And there was just this belief that like, well, you know, he's a good guy and a reputable guy. He's an airline pilot. You know, he's a sort of, you know, the aristocracy. And, you know, whatever he says is probably true. Like when the pilot says, you know, we're going to try to get above this weather, you don't think he's probably lying. You think, yeah, that's what he's doing. You know, and his word was trusted, and it was only through factors completely out of his control that the story fell apart. First of all, Mrs. Crafts believed that he was seeing somebody else, and she'd hired a private eye. And
this is like if this were Dateline.
Well, this is 100% Dateline.
It's perfect. It's perfect because it's everything that Mankiewicz just told you. And then in Act 2, you learn, he.
This is 12. This is 12 acts, so this is probably like Act 4.
Okay, Act 4. They tell you. Turns out, she was concerned with him doing something.
She didn't. Yeah,
even involved her elimination. Literally, she was worried about her own murder.
She was first of all. First of all, she was worried that he was having an affair, and she'd hired a private eye who had snapped pictures of him with another woman. The great thing is the private eye went to the cops, and the cops were like, we don't care.
Yeah, the cops shined on the private eyes. Isn't that, are you kidding? We know this guy. He's fine.
Yeah, come on, stop. What are you doing? Yeah. They clearly that didn't even cut. I mean, I think if the private eye hadn't blown the whistle, I think Rich Crafts might have completely escaped.
That's absolutely right. Without the private eye insisting on it.
Yeah, this is not like law enforcement eventually figuring it out. They had to be led to it. But then it turned out, this is something you alluded to a minute ago. Then it turned out that she, again, unbeknownst to her husband, she had said to friends, if anything happens to me, it's Rich, if I disappear. And that was kind of ominous because, I mean, that's very Dateline too. Not a lot of people say that. Not a lot of people foretell both their death, but also the suspect. Yeah. And, also she left the kids behind. She would never have done that. And his story just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And he didn't seem concerned or worried. It was a case of eventually like law enforcement having to be like pulled into this. And then of course it turned out that Richard Crafts had rented a wood chipper and was using it on the edge of a lake in pretty much like the middle of the night, like very late, which is one reason why people get noticed, because there's a guy, using a wood chipper like 10,
right.
Yeah, like at 10 o'clock at night or something. It was very late on a snowy day. And cops finally went back, looked in the wood chipper, found some hair and tissue that appeared to belong to Mrs. Crafts, and then looked in the lake where he was said to have used the wood chipper and found some more evidence of that kind, and also found, I think, the chainsaw that had been used to dismember her prior to her being put into the wood chipper.
And one of the aspects of this, Josh, as I recall, is that he had, as you say, rented the wood chipper, and the rental receipts, even though it was computer paper digital trail, there was a paper trail here of receipts. It was done in an extremely clunky way, although one senses one senses that his whole plan for getting away with this was, people are going to believe me when I say she vanished. They're not going to check. Nobody's going to look at what I rented, where I was, what I did, what she said. No, they don't care. When I say she's gone, she ran away, she left me, I don't know what happened, she decided to go back home, that I will be believed. I will be believed, and the woman will not be believed. And he was almost right.
He was very close to right about that.
I also recall one little detail that was sort of interesting, which is, as you say, it had snowed. And because it had snowed, even though there were reports of this, wood chipper in this area being used, authorities went down to that area. They couldn't find her remains. But when the snow melted, that's where they actually found a lot of her remains there. Right. So the whole thing is pretty gruesome. But
Undone by the Weather, which I think, by the way, should be the title of your autobiography.
Undone by the Weather. Very good. But there's that happy family. He
I know, she's
left
so
behind
beautiful.
The 3 kids. And she's beautiful. The 3 kids are beautiful. He's that's not a flattering picture.
There was also a chunk of carpet in their bedroom that was missing. Right. I mean, all of this just screams to law enforcement what's going on. Nope.
So,
didn't see it.
Josh, just to wrap up, the interesting coda to this, I think, is that because of a rule in Connecticut, a law, he was actually paroled. Imagine, he killed his wife and put her remains in a wood chipper to destroy them, and he actually gets out of prison. There he is being arrested.
Okay, here's the thing. First of all, this was the first case, I think, in Connecticut in which somebody was convicted of murder without a body. No body cases are very, very, very tough for prosecutors because so much evidence comes from the body: manner of death, time of death, cause of death. The marks on her throat match his hands. The bite mark, the saliva, DNA that may be left with the body, hairs or something that you might find at the body, and like there was no body. None of that information exists. There was nothing in the tissue and hair samples that they found that pointed to Rich Crafts, except that he had rented the wood chipper. But I mean, there
Sure.
wasn't that forensic DNA link that exists when you have a body. So it's very hard to prosecute a no body case. And when you parenthetically, when you hear that one has been prosecuted anywhere, you can be sure that the prosecution team had a tremendous hill to climb. And if they get a conviction, that means they were pretty good at it.
That's a really great point. Just because
it's hard to do.
there was a wood chipper, just because her remains are found on it, you'd think, aha, but not really. You've got to tie him to that.
Well, and I don't think this was his defense, but he could argue she died of natural causes. I thought I'd be blamed, so I disposed of her body.
Well, that's the argument that was used by who's the guy who they did the HBO
Robert Durst.
Yeah, Robert Durst.
Yeah, and other people before him. But yes, that's
sure.
I'm saying that like finding out that he rented a wood chipper and she's in it and parts of her are in it, not quite get you to murder, which might be why he was not. Mr. Kraft's sentence was only 50 years. And at the time that he was sentenced, which was the crime occurred in 1986, so he was sentenced at some point after that. The law in Connecticut was that if you were a model inmate, or at least you did not cause any trouble, that you got a certain amount of time off your sentence.
Well, this is a guy who got 30 years off of his, 20 years off of his prison sentence. So he went to prison in 87 and he just got out last year. They let him out. 2022, yeah. Richard Kraft was sentenced to 50 years, as Josh said. Let me put my credibility glasses on. The judge commented on his lack of remorse even at the time. Crafts, though, released and is living in a halfway house. He is 82.
So probably 83 now.
Yeah. But he's been in prison since 1987. There he is. But no remorse, but let go simply because of his good behavior in prison. Wow. That figures in a lot of cases. Jeez. Really something. But we somehow find ourselves returning to this case again and again and again. We really do. Yeah. Here's the interesting thing. Here's an interesting thing. True Detective magazine, which is often talked about as being sort of the first of the true crime publications, that was first published in 1924. So that'd be 100 years of interest in true crime, right? It's not brand new. Right? True Detective doesn't exist anymore, but it was driven out of existence by the internet and podcasts and TV shows about crime, not because there wasn't any more interest in it. Sure. But that certainly survived for a long time, and then a lot of other publications sort of spawned by that. This is exactly the kind of case that we would have done on Dateline if Dateline had existed back in the 1980s. But what's interesting is just how there you go. There's True Detective. Those of you watching. There's True Detective. That's the front cover of the magazine. The interesting thing is how obvious what happened in the wood chipper murder looks now that you've seen all of this true crime over the last almost 40 years since this happened. And how now you immediately think like, oh, of course it's husband. What are you talking about? You rented a wood chipper, that's it, right? But back then, man, it just like everybody from law enforcement to civilians just thought, I can't imagine what could have happened.
You know, despite the fact that like there's so many clues that just point down a road that we've all been down before, but we've been down it much more recently than stories like the WoodChipper murder, and that also benefited. That kind of thinking also benefited Nick Hackney, who we talked about at the beginning.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.